In the Caribbean Sea, just a few miles off Venezuela's coast, U.S. warships are now stationed, armed, alert, and ready. It's October 2025, and tensions between Washington and Caracas have reached their most dangerous point in decades. President Nicolás Maduro calls it the greatest threat our continent has seen in a century, while U.S. officials insist the deployment is aimed at disrupting narco-terror networks. But behind these official statements lies a much deeper story. A battle over oil, power, and influence that's quietly pulling the Western Hemisphere into a new Cold War. This video will uncover the real reasons behind this looming conflict, how it could turn fatal, and why nations like China, Russia, and even India are carefully watching every move. So let's start. The roots of this confrontation go back years. Since the rise of Nicolás Maduro after Hugo Chávez's death, Venezuela has been trapped in political turmoil. The 2018 elections were dismissed by the United States and most Western countries as fraudulent, and ever since, Washington has refused to recognize Maduro's presidency. This rejection was more than symbolic. It set the stage for the U.S. to treat Venezuela not as a legitimate government, but as a regime to be contained. Sanctions followed swiftly. The U.S. froze Venezuelan assets abroad, blocked its oil exports, and isolated its state oil company, PDVSA, from global financial markets. What made these sanctions devastating was that Venezuela possesses the largest proven oil reserves in the world, yet it could no longer sell freely. For a country that depended on oil for 90% of its export earnings, this was economic suffocation. By 2025, Washington went even further, introducing a 25% tariff on imports from countries trading Venezuelan crude. The message was clear: anyone doing business with Caracas would face economic retaliation. For the United States, this was about cutting off a lifeline to a regime it saw as corrupt and criminal. For Venezuela, it was a declaration of economic warfare. But this conflict isn't just about oil or economics. The U.S. has long accused Venezuela of functioning as a narco-state. American intelligence agencies allege that elements within the Venezuelan military and government, including high-ranking officers, have been involved in drug trafficking through groups like the Tren de Aragua and the infamous Cartel of the Suns. In early 2025, Washington went a step further, officially designating Tren de Aragua as a foreign terrorist organization. This move gave the U.S. legal justification to target Venezuelan assets and even individuals beyond its borders. Then came the military escalation. The U.S. Navy sent destroyers, amphibious ships, and even B-52 bombers near Venezuela's waters. The Pentagon called it part of a counter-narcotics operation, but the level of firepower told a different story. Caracas saw this as an imminent invasion. President Maduro responded by mobilizing national militias, activating air defense systems, including Russian-supplied S-300 missile batteries, and warning that any attack would be met with total resistance. In September 2025, things turned deadly. U.S. forces reportedly struck Venezuelan boats suspected of smuggling narcotics through the Caribbean. Dozens were killed. Washington framed it as a law enforcement action. Caracas called it an act of war. From that moment, both sides began operating at the edge of war. American warships patrolled dangerously close to Venezuelan waters. Venezuelan fighter jets frequently shadow U.S. aircraft. A single miscalculation could now ignite a full-scale confrontation. However, beneath the surface, this crisis is also a chess match between great powers. Venezuela's alliances with Russia and China have deepened in recent years. Moscow has provided arms, technical advisors, and energy cooperation, while Beijing has extended loans and strategic partnerships to secure oil access. For the U.S., this is not just about Venezuela. It's about preventing a rival power bloc from taking root in its traditional sphere of influence. That's why this standoff has a broader significance. The U.S. wants to reaffirm dominance in the Western Hemisphere, something it considers non-negotiable since the Monroe Doctrine of 1823. Meanwhile, Russia and China see Venezuela as a valuable foothold, a way to challenge American influence near its own borders. But if the confrontation turns violent, the consequences could be catastrophic. A direct clash between US and Venezuelan forces could trigger a regional war. Even limited airstrikes or naval engagements could destroy oil infrastructure, send energy prices soaring, and destabilize already fragile economies in Latin America. Millions of Venezuelans, already suffering from hyperinflation and shortages, could be forced to flee again, creating one of the largest migration waves in modern history. For Maduro, a foreign threat could serve as political fuel, a rallying cry to unite his population and suppress dissent. For the United States, any deeper involvement risks repeating the mistakes of past interventions, a costly entanglement in another Latin American crisis that could drag on for years. Meanwhile, other regional players are watching carefully. Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico fear that an American-led intervention could set a dangerous precedent for unilateral action. Even countries usually aligned with Washington are wary of escalation. The Organization of American States has called for restraint, but neither side seems willing to back down. The strategic timing of this conflict is also interesting. The U.S. presidential election cycle is heating up, and the White House is under pressure to project strength abroad. Taking a hard line on a narco regime close to home plays well domestically. For Maduro, standing up to the U.S. feeds his anti-imperialist image and distracts from Venezuela's economic collapse. Both leaders gain politically by escalating, and that's what makes this situation so dangerous. Even beyond the Americas, the world is responding. Russia has condemned U.S. actions, calling them colonial aggression, while China has urged dialogue but quietly expanded its security presence in Caracas. If either nation decides to back Venezuela more openly, through arms supplies, intelligence support, or naval coordination, the conflict could evolve into a small-scale proxy war. Energy markets are already reacting. Brent crude prices have climbed above $100 per barrel, partly due to fears of disruption from Venezuelan oil exports. Traders remember that even limited conflict in this region can have global economic consequences. In the end, the standoff between the US and Venezuela is about far more than just drugs or sanctions. It's a reflection of a shifting global order, one where power is contested not in the Middle East or Eastern Europe, but in America's own backyard. So the real question is, how far will Washington go to preserve its dominance, and how much is Caracas willing to risk for survival? If this turns into a shooting war, the cost will be enormous, for both nations and for the stability of the region. But if diplomacy fails, history might soon repeat itself. Another conflict born out of oil, power, and pride. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think the United States will actually launch a full-scale intervention, or will this confrontation remain a high-stakes game of pressure and posturing? And what role will Russia and China play if things spiral out of control? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read each one carefully. If you enjoyed this analysis, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into global geopolitics. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.